I want you to picture a very specific scene for a second.
Okay, set the stage.
Right. So it is the mid-1970s in Los Angeles.
Oh, a classic era.
Yeah. But there is this massive, relentless drought just baking the entire city.
Right, the 1976 drought.
Exactly. So water rationing is in full effect. Lawns are dying. They're turning completely brown. And in these sprawling, wealthy suburbs, you have these huge backyards with completely empty, bone-dry swimming pools.
Just these massive concrete craters.
Yes, exactly. And dropping into the deep end of these craters are teenagers. But they aren't diving into water. They are throwing themselves down these steep, curved walls on flat wooden boards attached to polyurethane wheels.
It's an incredibly striking, almost, I don't know, post-apocalyptic image, really.
It totally is.
You have these kids essentially writing the physical evidence of an environmental and economic crisis. I mean, they're quite literally playing in the ruins of the suburban dream.
And that perfectly sets up what we're talking about today. Welcome to another deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, we are looking at how a piece of flat wood on wheels turned a 1970s environmental crisis into, well, a global resistance movement.
It's a fascinating evolution.
It really is. We're diving into a stack of research today, including this great academic paper titled The Emergence of Skate Culture, Youth, Space, and Distance from Authority. And our mission today isn't just to talk about, kickflips and half-pipes.
Right, it goes way deeper than that.
Yeah, we want to uncover what happens when a generation loses faith in the system and how you can actually apply their genius for reinterpreting the world to your own life.
Which is such a valuable takeaway.
Because to really understand this, you have to look at the reality of the U.S. in that specific era. I think the popular imagination might jump straight to the glitz of disco.
Oh, sure, roller rinks and Saturday Night Fever.
Exactly. But the day-to-day reality for most people was, well, it was pretty grim.
Yeah, the post-war boom was officially over at that point. You had the oil crisis leading to literal physical lines at the gas station.
Right.
And then there's rampant inflation, soaring unemployment, widespread deindustrialization. The grand narrative of, suburban stability that defined the 50s and 60s was just visibly crumbling.
Yeah, it was falling apart.
And the environment was physically manifesting that economic anxiety.
Which means skate culture wasn't cooked up in some boardroom as a deliberate fashion aesthetic, right? The environment dictated the culture entirely.
Absolutely. It was the direct response to those conditions.
And the origin story is just brilliant in its simplicity. Back in the late 1950s, California surfers were just kind of bored on days when the ocean was flat.
They needed something to do.
Right. So they decided to, surf the asphalt. They slapped some clay wheels on pieces of wood just to mimic that feeling of riding a wave on the sidewalk.
But the technology was terrible back then.
Oh, yeah. Clay wheels are incredibly dangerous. Yeah. But by the 1970s, the tech shifted to urethane wheels, which actually grip the concrete. And then, like we said, the drought happens, the LA pools dry up, and suddenly these empty suburban basins are transformed into sites of intense physical performance.
And the architects who poured that concrete, they never, in a million years, imagined it would be used this way.
Never.
They designed a space for leisurely weekend swimming, right? A status symbol of middle-class wealth. But by writing it, the skaters were fundamentally altering its intended function.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because it's almost like life hacking an object, but on a massive citywide scale.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like, when you use a heavy coffee mug as a hammer because you can't find your actual tools.
Yeah, the classic makeshift hammer.
Right, they were taking an object built for one very specific purpose, leisure, and totally reinventing it.
And there's actually a really powerful sociological framework for what they were doing here. It ties into Henri Lefebvre's theory regarding the production of space.
Okay, walk us through that.
So Lefebvre basically argued that space is not merely a physical reality. It isn't just the concrete, the rebar, the property lines that you can measure.
Right.
Space is actually produced by social relations and unspoken agreements.
So, meaning a pool is only a pool because society collectively agrees that swimming is what we do there.
Exactly. The moment you drain the water and drop in with a skateboard, you rewrite the spatial rules of the city.
That is so wild. It actually reminds me of desire paths.
Oh, yeah, the urban planning concept.
Yeah. When an architect paves a really nice, sharp 90-degree sidewalk through a park, but everyone just cuts across the grass because it's a faster diagonal.
And then eventually thousands of footsteps wear a permanent dirt trail right into the lawn.
Yes. It shows how human kinetic needs just naturally overwrite urban planning. Skaters were doing that exact thing, but vertically in empty pools.
That captures the mechanism perfectly, yeah. The desire path proves that the intended design of a space often fails to account for how humans actually want to move through it. And skaters were actively intervening in the environment, creating their own hyperkinetic desire paths across suburban architecture.
See, I love that concept, but I do have a hard time buying that a bunch of 14-year-olds trespassing in empty pools were intentionally staging some sort of Marxist spatial rebellion.
Right, of course not.
Like, weren't they just bored kids trying to have a good time? We hear so much about the anti-authoritarian skater stereotype, but were they really sitting around reading anarchist manifestos?
You are absolutely right to question that. The anarchism associated with early skate culture was entirely experiential. It was not ideological.
Okay, experiential, meaning what?
Meaning they were not organizing a structured political agenda to overthrow the Los Angeles city government.
Right, they just wanted to skate.
Exactly. Their rebellion was just a byproduct of their play. But the result of that play was still a radical redefinition of private property.
Because eventually, the drought ends.
It does.
The pools fill back up with water. And these skaters, who now have this deep taste for vertical drops and curved walls, they have to look elsewhere.
So they turn to the public infrastructure of the city itself. Embankments, drainage ditches, schoolyard banks.
And obviously, you can't just go around changing the meaning of private and public property without someone getting incredibly upset.
Right. Moving from abandoned backyards to public architecture causes immediate, intense friction.
Suddenly, an everyday architectural feature, like a concrete ledge or a handrail outside a local bank, becomes a target.
Which is completely contrary to its design.
Exactly. A handrail is designed to maintain order, right, to guide people safely down a flight of steps. Grinding a skateboard down that handrail is an aggressive violation of that order.
And that brings us to how that anti-authoritarian identity actually formed. You brought up Michel de Certeau earlier.
Oh, wait, did I?
Well, the concept of the tactics of everyday life.
Right. Let's get into that.
Because skateboarding was so low cost, you didn't need to join a country club, you didn't pay league fees. Kids were just doing it everywhere in public.
Yeah.
And because of that, they were constantly being chased away by security guards and police officers. That constant physical removal shapes how a young person relates to authority.
Oh, absolutely. They learn that the institution's primary role is just to restrict their movement.
Right. So it isn't a theoretical textbook hatred of the police. It is the practical everyday reality of being threatened with a trespassing fine just for riding a piece of wood on a sidewalk.
It's a perfect example of adapting a system from within. I mean, you don't have to burn the bank down to rebel against it. You just use the bank's architecture to serve your own needs, rather than using it as the urban planners intended.
Exactly. It constitutes a small-scale, continuously repeated form of intervention. Skaters are constantly chipping away at the intended rules of the physical world.
And if we look at the timeline here, this is happening right as another massive cultural movement is bubbling up from the exact same atmosphere of economic instability.
The punk rock scene.
Yes, the punk rock scene. The late 70s and early 80s punk scene and the skate scene are just parallel manifestations of the exact same cultural moment.
Oh, they are completely intertwined.
They share this brilliant underlying ethos because, like, punk music deliberately privileged raw, visceral expression over polished perfection.
Yeah, you didn't need 10 years of classical training to start a punk band.
Exactly. You just needed a cheap guitar, 3 chords, and, something to scream about.
The barrier to entry for both was incredibly low, which meant they were highly accessible to the working class kids who were feeling the absolute brunt of the era's economic decline.
Right.
Both subcultures normalized low-budget, do-it-yourself forms of production, and because of that, they were inherently difficult for the mainstream to regulate.
And the synergy wasn't just theoretical either. The aggressive, fast-paced sound of punk perfectly matched the kinetic energy of skateboarding. I mean, the raw sound of urethane wheels grinding on concrete kind of feels like the physical equivalent of distorted guitar feedback.
That's a really great comparison.
But because skateboarders were being actively chased out of public spaces, mainstream society mostly just viewed them as a nuisance. So traditional sports media completely ignored them.
Yeah, mainstream media essentially refused to publish photos of skaters, let alone treat them as legitimate athletes or artists.
Which forced a pivot.
Right. Skaters quickly realized a harsh truth. If they didn't document themselves, their history would simply be erased by the authorities. They had to control their own image.
They realized they had to build their own printing press, essentially. Which brings us to 1981 out in San Francisco. Fausto Vitello and Eric Swenson found Thrasher Magazine.
A massively pivotal moment.
Yeah. I mean, it started as just a promotional tool for a truck company, but it rapidly became the ideological framework for the entire culture.
Thrasher was a conscious positioning outside the polished, clean language of traditional sports publishing.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about your own social media feed today. It is a relentless, highly curated highlight reel of perfection.
Oh, completely. It's exhausting.
Right. And mainstream sports media in the 1980s was doing the exact same thing. It was obsessed with discipline, flawless execution, Olympic-level success, peak performance.
You only ever saw the winning touchdown or the gold medal routine or the triumphant celebration at the end.
Exactly. But skateboarding, by its very nature, is fundamentally about falling down.
It is about failing, eating concrete, getting up, and trying again 50 times before landing a single trick.
And Thrasher made this incredibly profound editorial choice. They chose to make that failure visible. They actively printed photos of the brutal falls, the scraped knees, the broken boards.
Which was unheard of.
They were essentially doing the 1980s equivalent of posting their outtakes and failures for the entire world to see. It completely flips the script on what it means to be successful.
It really does. Showing failure created a narrative that actively resisted mainstream performance pressure. They were telling their audience that progress is not a clean, linear, upward trajectory.
It's messy.
Very messy. It's experimental. It is shaped through relentless repetition, pain, and resilience.
And honestly, that makes the famous Thrasher slogan, "Skate and Destroy," makes so much more sense to me now.
How so?
Well, for decades, outsiders and politicians assumed this was a literal call for physical vandalism. Like, go break the windows of the local bank.
Oh, right, the moral panic around it.
Exactly. But that's not what it meant at all, right?
No, not at all.
Exactly.
Destroy in this context never meant breaking the concrete. It meant destroying normative expectations.
Wow.
It was a call to shatter the conventional assumptions of how a space should be utilized. When a skater looks at a set of stairs, they destroy the idea of the stairs as merely a walking path, and they recreate them as a launch pad.
Destroy the assumption.
I love that.
And I want to look closely at how Thrasher captured that visually because their aesthetic is iconic.
Very much so.
They leaned heavily into the DIY punk fanzine, look raw graphic design, chaotic collages, all of that. But their real masterstroke was the mechanical use of the fisheye lens.
The fisheye lens is not just an artistic quirk either. It is crucial to the spatial arguments skateboarding was making.
Okay, let's break down how that actually works for a second. A fisheye is an ultra-wide-angle lens that captures an incredibly broad field of view, right? But it severely distorts the edges of the image. It kind of bows all the straight lines outward.
Right.
So when a photographer uses a fisheye lens and gets inches away from a skater's board, it does something magical to the environment. I mean, yes, it dynamically exaggerates the height and speed of the trick, but more importantly, it physically reframes the surrounding space.
It literally bends the architecture of the city around the skater.
Yes.
The skater becomes the gravitational center of a curved universe. The environment bends to the individual rather than the individual conforming to the environment. It is a visual representation of their entire philosophy.
And it built this incredible subculture. Because mainstream society measures your worth in very specific ways, right? College degrees, job titles, the size of your bank account.
The standard metrics.
But through Thrasher, these kids invented their own invisible currency. Mainstream validation meant absolutely nothing to them. Knowing the location of a secret, drained pool, or recognizing the style of an underground photographer, that made you wealthy in their economy.
And sociologists like Dick Hebdige and Sarah Thornton have written extensively about this. That is the essence of subcultural capital.
Right.
Thrasher enabled a specific style of resistance to circulate globally. So a kid in London and a kid in Los Angeles could look at the exact same magazine and understand they were part of the same shared visual language.
It proved you did not need the approval of institutional gatekeepers to build a legitimate, thriving culture.
Exactly. You could bypass them entirely.
And that DIY media legacy didn't just stop at magazines either. It evolved into an entire genre of documentary film. The research we are looking at highlights several films, and instead of just listing them off, I want to look at the powerful themes they represent.
Because they really are vital to understanding the movement.
Yeah, these documentaries serve as a visual archive of a culture trying to survive its own massive growth.
The evolution from underground rebellion to mainstream commodity is always fraught with tension.
Always.
And these films capture the social and economic conditions of that transition beautifully.
Let's take a film like Dogtown and Z-Boys, and its fictionalized counterpart, Lords of Dogtown. These cover that initial 1970s drought period we talked about earlier.
Mate, the early days.
And what you see in the beginning is the sheer, unadulterated joy of invention. But then, Lords of Dogtown zeroes in on the exact moment the money arrives.
Yeah.
You see these tight-knit working-class kids suddenly being offered massive corporate sponsorships.
The tension of commercialization, it explores the agonizing dilemma of selling out.
Yeah.
Like, how do you maintain a raw anti-establishment identity when a major corporation is offering you a lucrative contract to wear their logo on your shirt?
You almost can't. The identity inevitably fractures under that pressure.
And we see the darkest possible outcome of that commercial pressure in the documentary, All This Mayhem.
Oh, that one is intense.
Very. It follows two incredibly talented Australian brothers who reach the absolute pinnacle of professional skateboarding. But the film exposes the destructive reality of a subculture colliding with massive wealth and rigid institutional expectations.
It's heartbreaking. You see kids who grew up actively rejecting authority suddenly thrust into an environment of immense corporate pressure, and the result is just tragic self-destruction.
It forces the viewer to consider whether a culture born from rebellion can actually survive professionalization without losing its soul.
Right. But then other films highlight the deep emotional necessity of the culture, which is so important to remember.
Absolutely. Minding the Gap is a perfect example of that.
Honestly, it might be one of the most profound documentaries of the last decade. Period.
I would agree. It isn't really about skateboarding tricks at all. It uses the skateboard as a lens to explore deep emotional and sociological dimensions.
Yeah, it looks at economic precarity in the Rust Belt. It examines broken family structures, domestic abuse, and the complexities of modern masculinity.
There are these incredible moments in that film where you realize the skateboard isn't just a toy. It is a literal and figurative escape vehicle.
And the skate crew basically becomes a surrogate family. When the home is a place of violence or deep instability, the streets and the skate park become a space of solidarity and survival.
The act of moving forward on the board is sometimes the only thing keeping them from falling apart.
That's powerful.
The culture values collectivity so fiercely because, for many of these individuals, the collective was the only support system they actually had.
And when mainstream media still didn't understand that depth, skaters just continued to control their own narrative. You see this in Bones Brigade and Autobiography.
Oh, the VHS era.
Yeah. It details how, in the 1980s, skaters pioneered the use of independent VHS tapes. They bypassed television networks entirely. They were shooting, editing, and distributing their own videos.
When you synthesize all of this, it answers a fundamental question about the culture today. Even as an Olympic sport now, skateboarding fights relentlessly to maintain its underground sensibility.
It has to.
Right. It is a form of expression permanently shaped by the economic scars of its founders. They had to produce their own narrative, build their own spaces, and invent their own media because literally no one else was going to do it for them.
So what does this all mean for you, even if you have never stepped foot on a piece of grip tape in your entire life?
There's a huge lesson here.
Huge.
Yeah.
Skateboarding offers the ultimate masterclass in not accepting the world exactly as it is handed to you. It is about the power of looking at a deficit. Seeing an empty, abandoned swimming pool during an economic crisis, and choosing to see a stage for invention.
It teaches us that just because a system or a piece of architecture was designed for one specific purpose does not mean you have to conform to that purpose.
You have the agency to reinterpret your environment.
That is the core takeaway. And I want to leave everyone with a lingering thought to mull over.
Please do.
The skaters of the 1970s used physical architecture, the concrete and handrails of the city, to push back against a physical economic crisis. But today, for most of us, the public space we inhabit is heavily digital.
Oh, absolutely. We spend our lives navigating social media feeds, digital platforms, and online communities.
And that digital space is rigidly governed. It is governed by invisible algorithms designed to keep you scrolling, by paywalls, by terms of service, and by coded boundaries that dictate exactly how you are supposed to interact.
Right. The architects of the digital world want you to move in very specific, highly profitable ways.
So the question is, if
Yeah.
you were to apply the 1970s skaters' tactic of reinterpreting reinterpreting architecture to your digital life today. What is your empty swimming pool?
Oh, wow.
Where are the invisible boundaries in your online world, and how are you going to ride them differently than the developers intended?
How do you build a desired path through an algorithm? Man, that is the question that is going to stick with me all week. Reinterpreting the digital concrete. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure, really.
We hope you walk away today looking at the handrails, the empty spaces, and the architecture of your own life, both physical and digital, just a little bit differently. Keep questioning the intended use of things, and we'll see you next time.